My own father told me I would never make money. He delivered that curse at the family's glittering Christmas dinner. That night I wasn't just out of a job. I felt stripped of worth, like the whole world had finally agreed with what my father always believed, and that quiet shame started to turn into resolve. This is the story of how I took the $75,000 he thought was pixie dust, secretly built a company worth $25 billion, and delivered the ultimate corporate takeover right back on his mahogany desk exactly 5 years later on Christmas Day. Back then, I couldn't imagine numbers that big. But even that night, the thought of proving him wrong already felt heavier than the glass of champagne in my hand. I wasn't just here for the annual Christmas dinner. I was here for the first quiet move. They called me the failure, the dreamer, the one who'd never earned serious money. I was simply waiting for the moment Bloomberg would prove them wrong, and I intended to watch their faces crack when the news dropped. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone you love expects you to fail? I was about to turn that failure into their greatest embarrassment. My heart was beating a quiet, deliberate rhythm under my borrowed silk dress, a contrast to the stifling, polished atmosphere of the Hart family gathering. We were at the patriarch's table, but this was no family gathering, it was a board meeting in disguise. My father, Richard Hart, was 65, the chief executive officer and self-proclaimed anchor of Hart & Company Global Investments. He was a man who believed legacy was built on fixed assets and traditional banking, never on the fluid landscape of technology. He was the reason I was here waiting to challenge his world. Beside him sat my older brother, Marcus Hart, 34, the designated successor, and vice president of everything that mattered at Hart & Company. He was the automatic inheritance, the one who never had to prove his worth. I was merely Melissa, the overlooked daughter, the one who had spent years as a low-level analyst, hoping hard work would eventually earn me respect at the adult table. The air was thick with the scent of pine and expensive perfume, the room glowing with the light scattered by the towering Christmas tree. Everything was a statement: the sterling silver, the Villeroy and Boch china, the quiet authority of Richard Hart. He raised his crystal flute, his voice booming across the polished table. "A toast," he declared, "to Marcus for guiding Hart & Company to its most stable stock performance this quarter. That is what real money looks like, folks, predictable, tangible." Everyone clapped. Marcus offered a practiced, superior smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. My mother, Eleanor, gave me a small, placating smile, telling me to just be polite. Then Richard's eyes found mine. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a patronizing sigh. And of course, he continued, his tone switching from celebration to belittlement. "We have Melissa, our little tech startup enthusiast." A sudden heat rushed up my neck. I had briefly told him about my project Synergy X, the automated intelligence algorithm, an open ledger trading platform I had been building secretly. "It's not a hobby, Dad," I said calmly, trying to maintain the professional tone I used in actual boardrooms. "It's an automated intelligence algorithm that's showing strong potential." Richard let out a booming, condescending laugh that silenced the table and demanded the attention of every guest. "Oh, Melissa, sweetheart, you must understand that ideas are cheap. We deal in investment and stability. You're dabbling in decentralized finance pixie dust." He set his glass down, the click against the silver loud and final. Then he delivered the humiliation I knew was coming, the line that fueled my every long day and short night since. "You are a bright girl, Melissa. Go teach. Go do charity. But you will never make money from those digital fantasies. You simply do not have the family's business sense. You lack the legacy gene." The laughter that followed was polite, uncomfortable, but complicit. It sealed the injustice. A surge of cold, focused anger replaced the dull ache of the old betrayal. I excused myself, claiming a need for fresh air, and retreated to Richard's private library, a room of dark wood and even darker secrets. My eyes fell on the second smaller Christmas tree, and then on the mahogany desk. There, nestled amongst the neat piles of financial reports, was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the Hart & Company Human Resources stamp. I knew what it was. I had known for 3 months, but seeing the formal dismissal made my hand tremble. It was my official termination letter, effective immediately. The listed reason, restructuring and potential conflict of interest. They hadn't just slighted me publicly, they had systematically excluded me from my own life, firing me just before Christmas so they wouldn't have to deal with the fallout. The door creaked open. Marcus strolled in, holding 2 glasses of scotch. He stopped short, seeing the open envelope in my hand. "Ah, you found your gift," he said, taking a sip, his satisfaction unconcealed. "A hard lesson, but necessary. Dad thinks you were a toxic family risk with those amateur startup ideas." "Conflict of interest?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You knew, didn't you?" He shrugged, the self-importance shining in his eyes. "Someone needs to protect the legacy. You were just wasting time, Melissa. You had to go. You're not a chief executive officer. You're a distraction." I looked at him, at the person who was supposed to be my brother. The betrayal was complete. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into my clutch. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, a dangerous composure settling in my voice. "You've been very clear about your feelings. You just confirmed my motivation." I left the mansion immediately, driving back to my cramped apartment in Queens. The humiliation was over. The anger was not. I pulled out my phone and looked at the $75,000 from my grandmother's tiny will, the money meant for my student loans. I dialed Alex Collins, my partner. "Forget the loans, Alex," I said, staring at the twinkling lights of the city. "That money is our investment. We are going all in on Synergy X. And next time they see me, the news won't be coming from the Hart & Company Global Investments Public Relations Department. It will be from Bloomberg." The night I drove away from the Hamptons mansion, the initial numbness wore off, replaced by a razor-edge clarity. His words still echoed in my mind, a ghost of a curse I needed to exorcise with code and capital. I wasn't just unemployed. I was released. My father, Richard Hart, had done me the greatest favor, severing the cord of loyalty and false hope that had bound me to Hart & Company Global Investments. I had $75,000, the small inheritance from my grandmother's will, which was meant to be my student loan debt relief. Now that money was my single bullet, my seed investment in payback. I immediately moved out of my Queens apartment and into a rundown, unheated studio in a warehouse district of Brooklyn, closer to where the real startup energy was happening. I called it my monk phase. Those nights blurred together, shame turning into code into something that might one day speak for me. I was working 16-hour days, often sleeping 4 hours a night on a futon near my monitors. I was cutting corners everywhere, even negotiating my electricity bill. Something the daughter of Richard Hart never should have had to do. But every pinch of poverty felt like necessary fuel. Every time the radiator coughed or the cold crept into my fingers, I heard his laugh again, polished, dismissive, echoing like glass against glass. I knew I couldn't build this alone. Synergy X was too complex, resting on cutting-edge automated intelligence and open ledger architecture that needed a genius-level programmer. That's where Alex Collins came in. I had met Alex briefly during my time at Hart & Company. He was a programming talent who had pitched his decentralized finance concept to Richard Hart, only to be dismissed out of the office. His words still echoed in Alex too. "Too risky, no real assets, you will never make money with that." When I called Alex, he was teaching online coding classes, his talent wasted by the Wall Street establishment. "I have the seed funding and the business insight," I told him, skipping the pleasantries. "And I have the greatest motivation. Richard Hart just fired me on Christmas and told me I was worthless. Are you in?" Alex didn't hesitate. He saw the fire in my eyes, the shared injustice we both carried from the traditional finance world. We became partners, united by a singular desire to prove the old guard wrong. Our office was literally a corner of Alex's garage, freezing in the winter, baking in the summer. We focused relentlessly on the core product, an intelligent trading algorithm that democratized access to the global stock and open ledger markets, something built on transparency, not manipulation. One rainy Tuesday, 6 months in, we hit our first major roadblock. A crucial element of the distributed ledger technology for our trading platform failed stability testing. The code was theoretically sound, but the real-time market data caused unexpected volatility. Alex was ready to tear the system apart, convinced his logic had failed. But I saw the data clearly. It's not the code, Alex. It's the human element. The system is reacting perfectly to the irrationality of the market, I said, drawing on my analyst years at Hart & Company. We spent the next 48 hours tweaking the algorithm, using my proprietary insight into client psychology to model irrational, high-frequency human trading, forcing the automated intelligence to anticipate failure. That small, crucial technical victory solidified my role as more than just the financier. My family assumed I had failed. My mother, Eleanor, would call occasionally, her voice strained, full of subtle prompting. "Melissa, darling, just come back to Hart & Company. You can do some online training videos. Your little startup obviously didn't work out. Your father is worried about your reputation." I would listen politely and lie. I told her I was freelancing for an overseas tech firm providing strategic market analysis. I was deliberately creating a hidden reality, allowing them to believe the narrative of my failure. This period of silent effort gave me the cover I needed. They stopped looking for me because they assumed I had failed. Being underestimated was exactly where I needed to be. One evening, after 6 months of relentless coding, Alex burst into the garage, waving his laptop. Melissa, Sequoia Ridge venture capital firm in San Francisco just reached out. They found our white paper on a private forum. They want a demo pitch. They're talking about seed funding of $500,000. It was our first true validation, but it brought our first major crisis. 500,000. I whispered the number, feeling huge and terrifying. But they want us in San Francisco next week. We have about $1,000 left in the bank, Alex. That money was supposed to cover rent and servers for another month. Alex's face fell. We're technically insolvent. We can't even afford the flight tickets and a decent hotel. I walked over to my desk and pulled out my little black notebook. I opened the page where I had meticulously tracked the original $75,000. It was all gone, converted into server space, legal fees, and ramen. "We have to go," I said, the words heavy with finality. "This is our only shot. We are not failing because of a flight ticket." I looked at Alex. "Remember what my father told me? You will never make money. We're going to put every cent we have left into those tickets. It's a literal all-or-nothing moment. If we fail this pitch, we lose the startup and the only money I have." Alex nodded, his eyes reflecting the sharp determination in mine. "Let's book those flights. It's time to show those West Coast venture capital firms what a couple of Wall Street outcasts can do." I clicked on the booking website, my finger hovering over the confirm button. This was it, the final desperate gamble. If this failed, Richard Hart's words would be eternally true. I confirmed the tickets, watched the last remnants of my savings vanish, and smiled. I felt more like a chief executive officer, now risking everything than I ever did wearing a power suit at Hart & Company. This payback had officially begun its countdown. The flight to San Francisco was a haze of anxiety and relentless focus. Alex and I barely slept rewriting the technical details of the automated intelligence and open ledger architecture on a shared tablet. We had 40 minutes to prove the last 2 years, every sleepless night, every unpaid bill had meant something. 40 minutes to prove I wasn't a mistake. We arrived feeling worn down, but the air in Silicon Valley was charged with the kind of boundless risk and ambition that felt like oxygen after the stifling legacy of Hart & Company Global Investments. The meeting was with Sequoia Ridge, a major venture capital firm. We stood in their glass-walled boardroom, a world away from our dusty Queens garage. I remember the partners younger than my father, but with the same sharp, assessing eyes. I delivered the pitch, not just detailing the technical brilliance of Synergy X's distributed ledger platform, but the emotional story, how the Wall Street establishment refused to evolve, and how our automated intelligence offered the transparent alternative they craved. The real win wasn't the technology, though. It was the data. I had carried out years of proprietary trading patterns and client psychology insights from my time at Hart & Company. This proprietary insight was the one thing the traditional finance world couldn't replicate. When the lead partner, a woman named Vanessa, smiled a genuine, non-patronizing smile, I knew we had them. Synergy X secured seed funding of $500,000. It was enough to stabilize us, move us into a real office, and most importantly, confirm that my father, Richard Hart, was profoundly wrong. This was our small, decisive victory. The moment the funds hit our bank account, I broke my silent effort phase. Not to boast, but to gauge the damage. I called my mother Eleanor, who answered immediately, relieved but cautious. "Melissa, darling, I told your father you'd call when the little startup thing ran out of money." "It didn't run out, Mom," I corrected, keeping my voice light. "We just closed a seed funding round for $500,000 with Sequoia Ridge." Silence. Then a carefully rehearsed response. "Oh, well, that's nice, dear. But $500,000 is what your father spends on a new painting. It's lovely that you're pursuing a hobby, but you should come back to New York. The real legacy is here, not in those little tech pockets." Her cold response stung, but it solidified my resolve. They didn't see success. They only saw a threat to their narrative. My real test came a week later. I bumped into Marcus at a midtown coffee shop near the Hart & Company offices. He was mid-call, wearing an expensive suit and looking every bit the entitled successor. He saw me and ended his call, walking over with a smirk. "Melissa, look, who came back from playing entrepreneur, didn't see your picture on Bloomberg yet." I told him about the seed funding with a quiet pride. I detailed the valuation and the promise of a future in this new market. Marcus only gave a casual, dismissive headshake. $500,000. That's Hart & Company's quarterly coffee budget, little sister. You've just traded in teaching for being a glorified tech pauper. You're still nowhere near where the serious money is made. You'll never make money that matters. His casual put-down was far worse than my father's, because it was laced with genuine contempt and zero concern. He wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to protect his position. He saw my success not as inspiration, but as a personal insult to the favoritism he'd enjoyed for 30 years. I didn't argue. I looked him in the eye, and the quiet, surgical focus I felt was absolute. "Keep your coffee budget, Marcus," I said, "because I just used $500,000 of real capital to prove you obsolete." The small confrontation felt like a major line in the sand. I realized the payback had to be absolute. Not just a successful startup, but one that actively challenged their legacy. My focus shifted from emotion to the absolute cold calculation of achieving the billion-dollar valuation. I went back to Alex. "We're done playing the local startup game," I told him. "We're done with seed funding. We are building a company worth $1 billion. No more talk. Just work." We moved out of the garage and into a tiny, legitimate office space in Long Island City. The target was set the Series A round. The purpose was absolute: to earn enough money to become a legitimate existential threat to my father's throne. My life became a loop: coffee pitch decks, the hum of servers, and the metallic taste of fear every time an investor blinked too long at a number. This round was critical. We needed the cash infusion to scale and hire a development team to turn the startup from a proof of concept into a genuine market-ready challenge. The cramped office and the relentless schedule were taxing, but the internal pressure was the worst. I knew Richard Hart, my father, and the entire structure of Hart & Company Global Investments were watching. They were quiet, but I could feel their presence like a low-frequency dread. Our breakthrough seemed imminent. Atlantic Ventures, a prestigious venture capital firm known for backing successful disruptors, had signaled strong interest. Their lead partner, Mark, was excited by our valuation projections and the transparency of our decentralized finance solution. We were days away from signing the term sheet for the full $5 million. I allowed myself a fleeting moment of relief. But that relief evaporated on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Mark called. His voice was tight, rehearsed. "Melissa, I apologize," he began, every word dripping with insincerity. "We're pulling out, effective immediately." My breath hitched. Mark why we hit every metric you asked for. Is it the decentralized finance volatility? No, not entirely, he hedged. It's internal concerns about market stability. And frankly, the principal partners have long-standing relationships with other financial institutions. We can't risk alienating them. I hung up the phone, feeling like ice. A raw, cold shock seized my chest. The humiliation from the Christmas dinner wasn't just a memory, it was an active weapon. A burning rage for my father's petty, pervasive control immediately followed. But beneath it throbbed a terrifying fear. Was I destined to fail, not because of my ideas, but because Richard Hart controlled every gatekeeper I wanted to scream to shatter something expensive? But all I could do was stand still, feeling the weight of the old betrayal settling back on my shoulders. The phrase hung in the air, other financial institutions. It was a euphemism, a polite Wall Street code word for Richard Hart. I didn't argue. I called an old classmate, Stephanie, who now worked as a managing director at Atlantic Ventures. She was the only person I knew there who wasn't tied to my father's generation. We met at a discreet bar late that night. She took a long sip of her wine, looking uncomfortable. "It was your father, Melissa," she confessed, the hidden reality dropping like a lead weight. "Richard Hart called our main investor Mr. Jameson. He didn't threaten us overtly. He just strongly advised against investing in Synergy X, calling you unstable, a low-level employee we had to let go, and claimed your automated intelligence software was prone to failure. He said Hart & Company would reconsider doing business with any firm that funds your startup." The revelation wasn't a surprise, but the depth of his manipulation was chilling. He used his power like a leash, trying to pull me back into the failure he had built for me. The wound from the Christmas dinner was now bleeding again, but this time it was a battle injury. "So what now, Melissa?" Alex asked, looking at the dwindling balance in our bank account. "No major venture capital firm on the East Coast will touch us now. We're blacklisted." I looked out the window, not at the New York skyline that represented my father's domain, but across the ocean. "Then we don't play on his playground anymore. The world is bigger than Wall Street, Alex. We go international. We find private funding from investors who don't answer to the rules of the Hart dynasty." We spent the next few days pivoting our strategy. Our cash reserves were dangerously low, and we debated taking out personal loans or selling a small, immediate equity stake at a deeply discounted rate, just to cover server costs for the next 3 months. This period of quiet desperation of realizing we might lose everything because of one old man's phone call was the hardest. Just when our hope was starting to fade, a single email arrived late one night. It was from Lion Global, a highly secretive investment consortium based in Singapore. They expressed interest in Synergy X's technology. The email wasn't just about Series A. It was an aggressive, unsolicited offer to merge Series A and Series B, injecting a massive $30 million into our company immediately. The valuation was incredible, but then came the catch. The subject line stated one clear, non-negotiable condition: Melissa must relocate the company and live in Singapore for at least 2 years. The move was necessary to avoid any legal challenge or manipulation from the U.S. financial establishment, specifically Hart & Company Global Investments. I stared at the screen, the number $30 million glowing like a beacon. Leaving New York, leaving my life, leaving the immediate vicinity of my enemies, it felt like a massive sacrifice. But the move would put me beyond Richard Hart's reach, allowing Synergy X to grow unhindered. I looked at Alex. "Singapore it is," I said, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. "It's time for the prodigal daughter to become the ghost." I dreamed of the day Bloomberg would say my name, and I'd watch the pride drain from their faces like color from a dying photograph. The heat of Singapore hit me like a physical force, a stark, humid contrast to the cold, structured environment of New York. This wasn't just a business move. It was an act of personal exile, a self-imposed sentence designed to shield Synergy X from the toxic reach of Richard Hart. We had $30 million from Lion Global, but the price was 2 years of near absolute silence. I shed the identity of Melissa Hart, the dismissed daughter of Hart & Company Global Investments, and became Melissa Hart, the focused chief executive officer of a rising startup. The change was total. Our office was in a sleek, anonymous tower far removed from the gossip of Wall Street. My days were consumed by scaling the automated intelligence and open ledger platform, refining the distributed ledger architecture, and managing the aggressive user growth that the Lion Global funding demanded. 6 months into the move, we encountered a crucial issue. The regulatory framework in Southeast Asia was complex and fragmented. Our platform, designed for the aggressive U.S. market, was hitting legal hurdles in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. This wasn't a coding problem. It was a pure chief executive officer challenge. I spent weeks leading cross-border legal teams, negotiating with 3 different financial regulators, and successfully pivoting our platform to adopt a flexible region-specific application programming interface. For the first time, I felt like a true chief executive officer navigating pure political power rather than code. It proved I could run a multi-million-dollar business without the shadow of my father's firm. A year in, we faced a volatile currency crisis in 2 key Asian markets. The rapid fluctuation threatened to liquidate a significant portion of our retail client base overnight. It was a crisis designed to expose the fragility of open ledger systems. While Alex and the tech team scrambled for a technical fix, I mobilized our regional sales teams and deployed a sophisticated real-time risk mitigation strategy, leveraging my old Wall Street insight to predict and hedge against the governmental responses. It was a brutal 72-hour period, but we emerged not only unscathed, but with a reputation for rock-solid stability. That crisis solidified my place as the strategic anchor of SynergyX, proving my worth was beyond coding or fundraising. It was pure market dominance. I allowed myself only minimal contact with the family. My mother, Eleanor, would call every few months, always stressed, her voice straining to uphold the family appearance. "Melissa, darling, how is that little tech job working out? You should really think about coming home. Your father says Hart & Company is so stable he could use your organizational skills." The attempts at prompting me home were clumsy. They had clearly decided that my prolonged absence was proof that my startup had failed and that I was too ashamed to admit it. Marcus would occasionally post self-satisfied updates on social media showcasing his expensive golf trips and bragging about Hart & Company's stock performance, always emphasizing tradition over volatility. Their legacy was built on their own lack of awareness. They had completely forgotten my secret agenda. One evening, I made the mistake of calling my father Richard Hart on his 67th birthday. I missed him, or rather, I missed the idea of a father. He answered, audibly annoyed by the interruption to his dinner. "Melissa, where are you calling from? The connection sounds odd." "Singapore, Dad. I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday." He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that brought me right back to the Hamptons dining room. "Singapore? Still playing your global games, are you? You know Marcus is talking about buying a yacht this year. He understands where the money flows. You're always chasing those risky new markets. When are you going to stop with the startup nonsense and find some stability?" I hung up shortly after. His slight was no longer a wound, but a whetstone sharpening my edge. He was still living in the past, measuring success by the rigid, outdated rules of his own making. He was so focused on Marcus and the failing legacy that he failed to notice the global financial market shifting entirely beneath his feet. My desire for payback matured here in the East. It was no longer about hurting him. It was about demonstrating that his entire worldview was obsolete. My payback had become reclamation. I wasn't fighting for a seat at his table. I was building an entirely new, bigger table, one that would render him irrelevant. My focus shifted from just earning money to achieving an unassailable valuation, one that would make the NASDAQ sit up and take notice. 2 years flew by. SynergyX became a force. Our automated intelligence platform dominated the global retail investment sector, pulling users away from conventional brokers like Hart & Company and into our transparent tech ecosystem. We now had 500 employees globally and technology that far surpassed anything the old guard had even dreamed of. Then came the email. Alex rushed into my office, waving his phone, his face a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Melissa Atlantic. Venture's the same venture capital firm that pulled out of our Series A because of your father. They just sent an aggressive email. They're tracking our growth, and they want back in. They want to lead our Series C round. They're talking about a valuation approaching $1 billion. I took a slow, deep breath, the humidity of Singapore suddenly feeling like an invigorating force. Atlantic Ventures, huh? They finally realized they chose the wrong heart. This is huge, Melissa. It proves we won. Not yet, Alex. I corrected, a cold smile forming. Winning isn't just about the money or the valuation. It's about ensuring the right people witness the moment of their failure. I composed my response to Atlantic Ventures. It was brief and professional. I accepted their offer to lead the Series C and set the official valuation at $750 million, but I added one crucial condition. The pitch meeting will not be held in Singapore or San Francisco, I wrote. It will be held in New York, in Manhattan, and I require confirmation that Richard Hart is fully aware of Atlantic Ventures' new investment focus. I want him to know his blacklisting attempt didn't just fail. It created a rival worth $750 million. I leaned back in my chair looking out at the glittering, defiant skyline of Singapore. The time for the silent effort phase was over. The ghost was coming home, and the payback would be delivered right back on Wall Street. The moment the wheels of the private jet touched down at Teterboro, I felt the sharp, exhilarating pull of New York, my enemy territory, and now my personal arena. I wasn't the defeated employee who had fled 2 years earlier. I was the chief executive officer of a company valued at $750 million. I had traded my Brooklyn studio for a sleek, glass-walled apartment in Manhattan, close enough to see the fixed authority of the Wall Street towers, including the one that housed Hart & Company Global Investments. My return was not announced, but it was inevitable. I had come back for one purpose: to complete the Series C funding round and ensure my father, Richard Hart, received the news not through gossip, but through official, undeniable market action. The first meeting was the crucial test. I met with Atlantic Ventures, the same venture capital firm that Richard Hart had manipulated into pulling out of our Series A round. The tension in their boardroom was palpable. The partners, older suited and now incredibly respectful, were all there. They weren't just apologizing, they were eagerly hoping for a piece of the action. Mark, the partner who had called me 2 years ago with the polite excuse, led the presentation. Melissa, we are profoundly impressed by Synergy X's growth trajectory. The automated intelligence platform and its dominance in the decentralized finance market are frankly revolutionary. We project your valuation will comfortably cross the $1 billion mark within the next 18 months. I listened, maintaining a cold professional silence. I let the numbers and their eagerness speak for my worth. When it came time to negotiate, I dictated the terms with surgical precision. The power dynamics had completely reversed. They were no longer the gatekeepers. They were supplicants, hoping to ride my wave. They signed the term sheet for the Series C round, and I secured another $750 million in funding, sealing our place as a major industry player. As I left the Atlantic Ventures high-rise, I made a calculated detour. The building was right next door to Hart & Company Global Investments. I deliberately strode through their lobby, my chief technology officer Alex trailing slightly behind me. I stopped ostensibly to check my phone right in front of the marble plaque bearing the Hart name. I knew exactly who would see me. Mrs. Peterson, the executive assistant to the chief financial officer, a notorious source of gossip, was walking by. Our eyes met. Her expression went from mild interest to utter shock. The unsaid facts of my return and my success was now making its way up the corporate ladder. This was the opening shot. The predictable call came 30 minutes later during my ride back to the Manhattan apartment. It was my mother, Eleanor, her voice thin and high-pitched with panic. "Melissa, you're here. Why didn't you tell us Mrs. Peterson just called your father hysterical? She says you look established, and that you were leaving the Atlantic Ventures building. Why were you there?" Her panic was a small, satisfying hum in the back of my mind, confirming the exact ripple I intended to cause. I remained detached. "Mom, I'm back for a few meetings. I'm providing strategic market analysis for a global investment firm. Atlantic Ventures is interested in expanding their portfolio. I can't discuss the details, confidentiality, you understand." I used Richard Hart's own business jargon against her. Market analysis. Oh, thank goodness. Your father was worried you were still doing that tech startup thing. He said any rival to Hart and Company would be handled swiftly. "Please, darling, come to dinner. We need to talk about the family legacy." She was attempting a frantic nudge to draw me back under their sphere of control. "I'm very busy, Mom. I'll see what I can do for dinner. I'm afraid my schedule is dictated by market hours now." I hung up feeling a powerful sense of victory. I was no longer fighting them. I was floating above them. Later that evening, Alex and I celebrated with a quiet toast. This moment, more than the Series C funding, felt like the final step. He showed me a news alert. The alert discussed the massive Series C round for an unnamed tech disruptor, citing sources familiar with Atlantic Ventures. The market was already buzzing about Synergy X. But then came the unexpected information that shifts the entire playing field. Alex handed me his laptop. "Look at this, an anonymous leak from an internal server at Hart & Company." The document was a confidential financial report stamped with, "For Chief Executive Officer, eyes only." It clearly detailed a staggering multi-million-dollar loss stemming from a bad stock trade, a major failure in risk management. The name attached to the decision, Marcus Hart. The company was quietly losing significant funds, and Marcus's overconfidence had accelerated their downfall. I stared at the screen, the data confirming my suspicions. Marcus, the successor, was dismantling the legacy from the inside. "The initial public offering must be timed perfectly," I said, my voice cold and steady. "We won't just float to a high valuation. We'll use our market entry to capitalize on their weakness. We'll time our payback with their public exposure." The final step was confirming the source of the leak. Alex managed to trace the email. It came from a disgruntled mid-level manager who had been fired, a victim of Marcus's incompetence. I smiled. Even their own people were turning against them. The final countdown had truly begun. The instant I validated the internal Hart & Company documents showing Marcus's catastrophic multi-million-dollar stock mistake, the game changed. This was no longer just about personal payback. This was about capitalizing on a structural weakness that threatened their entire legacy. Marcus, the successor, was inadvertently dismantling the kingdom from within, and my job was simply to time the fall. The document confirmed that Hart & Company's financial position was shaky, maintained only by the public appearances Richard Hart meticulously crafted. 3 days after my return, the expected summons arrived, a stiff email from my father's executive assistant requesting my presence for a confidential business lunch at the Century Club, a sacred Wall Street institution, and precisely the kind of setting designed to re-establish his authority. I walked into the wood-paneled, hushed dining room with the calm of a calculated operator. The air here was thick with old money and quiet authority. The lighting meticulously dimmed to hide the aging leather and the aging men within. Richard Hart stood offering a stiff professional handshake, not a hug. The only sounds were the distant, muffled clink of silver and the low, self-important murmur of legacy deals being conducted in hushed tones. It felt less like a restaurant and more like an exclusive clubhouse defined by its own inertia. He was wearing his armor, a Savile Row suit, a mask of control, but the lines around his eyes were deeper. The patriarch was struggling. "Melissa," he began, ignoring the fact that I was the chief executive officer of a significant company and attempting to treat me like a prodigal child. "I'm proud of your little software firm. I told you ideas are cheap, but tech is buzzing. I wanted to hear about your growth strategy." He was fishing clumsily, trying to extract information about our funding without admitting his firm was losing money. I maintained a calculated professional distance, offering vague philosophical answers. "My growth strategy. Dad is centered on market disruption and honest valuation. I replied, sipping my water. It's about building a legacy based on the product, not just on manipulation of client sentiment. He flinched. The word manipulation hit its target. He quickly switched tactics, playing the age card, the sentiment card. Look, I'm 67 years old. I've built this firm for the family. We've weathered storms before, but the market is volatile. It's important that family sticks together, don't you think? I think competence sticks together, I countered. You always taught me that money respects only stability and numbers. And frankly, the traditional Wall Street model feels unstable. He was about to retort when the doors swung open and Marcus strolled in, late and loud, radiating false confidence. Sorry, Dad got held up with a client, Marcus announced, pulling up a chair and ignoring me initially. He quickly glanced at me. Melissa. Back from the jungle. Still selling that decentralized finance software. We're all trying to figure out if you're a competitor or just a persistent amateur. We just closed our Series C. Marcus, I said, my voice utterly flat. I'm no longer an amateur. Marcus let out a dismissive sound loud enough to draw glances. Series C? Good for you. That's maybe a tiny percentage of Hart & Company's Q1 revenue. You should sell your stock before the little startup bubble bursts. That open ledger noise is just noise. His attempt at dismissal was desperate. He didn't understand the market, and his sheer insecurity was obvious. He was focused on money and stock prices, but knew nothing of the underlying technology that was already rendering his job irrelevant. Richard Hart intervened sharply. Marcus, stop. Melissa, listen. We have an acute short-term liquidity need, a result of some poor investment choices by management. We need a capital injection quietly before the end of the year. The confrontation had reached its peak. He was openly admitting his weakness, something I knew he would never do unless the company's survival was at stake. We need a significant cash infusion to cover the stock losses before the Bloomberg reporters get wind of it. Richard confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, a quiet tremor in his hand giving away his control. Do you know any venture capital firms? Serious firms, Melissa, who are looking to invest in a stable traditional institution like ours? This was the trap. I knew the truth. Atlantic Ventures was eager to throw more money at my $750 million company. But Richard Hart was asking for help to save his firm from the exact mistake Marcus had made. Atlantic Ventures. I mused, pretending to consider it. They are entirely focused on high-growth tech right now, Dad. I hear they're fully booked through next year, especially with disruptive startup investment. I delivered the lie calmly, watching the last flicker of hope fade from his eyes. He didn't connect the dots, still unable to conceive that I was the very disruptor Atlantic Ventures was investing in. I can't help you, Dad, I said, standing up. My focus is on my own firm. You always taught me never mistake sentiment for sound business practice. Enjoy your holiday. I left them sitting there, two defeated men, clinging to a struggling firm. The moment I stepped out of the club, my phone buzzed with the ultimate confirmation from Alex. The final email, approved by the NASDAQ board, set the date for the Synergy X initial public offering. The date was December 24th, Christmas Eve, the day before the Hart family Christmas dinner. I smiled, a cold, unwavering expression of triumph. This wasn't just payback. This was perfect targeted timing. The retribution would be delivered not just through a news report, but as a family tradition. I texted my mother immediately. I'll be there for dinner on the 25th. The trap was set. The moment the NASDAQ date was confirmed, Christmas Eve, the pace of life accelerated past anything I had experienced in Singapore. The air in New York hummed with the energy of the upcoming initial public offering. My startup Synergy X was no longer a disruptor. It was an inevitable phenomenon, fueled by the $750 million from our Series C and the market's thirst for automated intelligence in this evolving sector. The official pre-initial public offering valuation was set at $25 billion. The number was massive, satisfying, and the perfect counterpoint to my father's curse. The media frenzy began immediately. I gave interviews carefully, controlling the narrative, the tech pioneer, the innovator, the challenger of the old guard. I deliberately withheld my family connection knowing Bloomberg would do the work for me. My first calculated public move was aimed squarely at Marcus. I secured prime advertising space, a massive digital billboard on the side of a New York skyscraper, visible from the window of the Hart & Company Global Investments Executive Suite. The billboard was simple, the Synergy X logo, and the tagline, "The future of finance is here." The ripple effect was immediate. My phone rang constantly, but I ignored all family calls. I was in a strategic conflict, and the first shot had been heard. Marcus saw the billboard, and the shock confirmed the threat was real. He didn't call. He showed up at my Manhattan apartment unannounced, wearing a rain-soaked overcoat, his usual false confidence replaced by desperation. "Melissa, stop this," he demanded. Stepping into my minimalist high-rise living room, a space that cost more than his entire annual bonus. "Synergy X is generating too much visibility. You need to tone down the publicity. Dad says you're creating an unnecessary rival to Hart & Company." "Your father said I was a persistent amateur," I reminded him, maintaining a steady calm. "Amateurs don't buy full building ads in Manhattan, Marcus." He swallowed hard. "Look, I'll be direct. We need help. That stock loss I incurred, it's bigger than we thought. The money is gone, and Dad is terrified the board will find out before the end of the year. If you could just invest a small amount, a few million, to stabilize the fund." He was pleading. The entitled successor was pleading with the sister he had publicly humiliated. I watched him struggle, feeling the cold satisfaction of absolute accountability. "You want money. You want an investment, Marcus. You told me my work was a distraction, pixie dust. You told me I'd never make money that mattered. Why would I sink my company's capital into yours when your judgment is the reason your legacy is failing?" I looked up, a glimmer of shame replacing his desperation. "I was wrong to humiliate you, Melissa. I was wrong to try and get you fired. I was scared of you then, and I'm terrified now. Just give us a chance to fix my mistake." I watched him struggle, feeling the cold satisfaction of absolute accountability. "I wish I could say I was sorry, Marcus, but you needed this lesson more than I needed the money." I calmly rejected his plea, reminding him of his own words, and watched him leave defeated. The final crack in his composure was audible, but the final element of my retribution had to be precise. It had to hit Richard Hart directly in his most vulnerable spot, his pride in Wall Street dominance. The night before the NASDAQ listing, I launched a highly targeted custom digital campaign. It was an exclusive advertisement banner featuring my face, the Synergy X logo, and the $25 billion valuation that flashed directly onto the screens of Bloomberg terminal users globally. These were the screens used by every senior executive and trader at Hart & Company Global Investments. The unsaid facts of my identity were now being broadcast to the very core of my father's empire. The reaction was chaos. Traders were whispering, executives were scrambling, and Richard Hart's control was visibly fracturing. I received an email from an anonymous burner account, a final leak from a terrified insider. It contained the schedule for the Hart & Company Christmas dinner in the Hamptons, the exact menu, the guest list, and the timing. I smiled. The setup was complete. My retribution was timed to deliver maximum impact. I checked my phone. It displayed a message from my mother Eleanor, who, despite the current financial turmoil, still clung to appearances. She was confirming my attendance at the dinner on the 25th. I accepted the invitation. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the official Bloomberg news alerts began flashing across my laptop screen. Synergy X initial public offering set for 9:30 in the morning Eastern Standard Time on NASDAQ. I stood at the window looking out over the cold, indifferent city. I was no longer the girl who ran away in shame. I was the silent billionaire ready to execute the final act of justice. The air inside the NASDAQ market site was electric, a controlled chaos that felt vastly different from the stifling order of the Hamptons mansion. It was Christmas Eve, December 24th, and my startup Synergy X was minutes away from its initial public offering. I stood on the podium, Alex beside me, surrounded by the glow of monitors and the cacophony of financial journalists. The entire scene was the complete, undeniable rejection of everything my father, Richard Hart, stood for. I was wearing a simple, sharp black suit, no diamonds, no family legacy, just the armor of a woman about to control a $25 billion valuation. I thought of my father's words, "You will never make money." I thought of Marcus's dismissive laughter, the silence of the 2 years in Singapore, the humiliation of the termination letter. It had all led to this single explosive moment of success. At precisely 9:30 in the morning, I pressed the button. The NASDAQ bell rang out a sound that echoed not just across Times Square, but across the world's financial markets. Synergy X was officially public. The screens behind me immediately flashed the initial stock price, which surged instantly. The crowd erupted. I allowed myself a small, internal smile. This was the moment of retribution, but the true feeling was freedom. Within 30 minutes, my team handed me a tablet displaying the lead headline, "Tech Disruptor Synergy X Achieves Historic $25 billion Valuation in Blockbuster Initial Public Offering." The news was official, the world knew. I shared a quiet private moment with Alex away from the cameras. "We did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "No, they did it," I corrected, looking at the soaring stock price. Their refusal to acknowledge my worth was the ultimate unforgiving seed money. We just executed the business plan. What? I thanked Alex for believing in the original $75,000 idea, the true small miracle of our foundation. I was done with the formalities by noon. The final setup, the perfect dramatic flourish, had to be deployed. I had already purchased the massive high-definition television. I instructed the delivery team to install it immediately in the Hart family dining room, ensuring it was tuned to the Bloomberg news channel. This wasn't a gift. It was a mechanism of silent warning. The Christmas Eve phone call came as I was being driven back to Manhattan. It was Richard Hart, but his voice was completely devoid of its usual booming authority. It was quiet, cautious, even tinged with a desperate attempt at respect. "Melissa," he began, "your mother and we saw the Bloomberg reports. Your valuation. It's tremendous. I never thought, I am proud of you." The word proud was a tool wielded too late. He was trying to reclaim the legacy he had disowned. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, my voice cool. "I'm glad my little startup finally reached a number you can comprehend." "We want you at dinner tomorrow," he pressed. "We've had a difficult year and we need family. We need to talk about," he struggled for the right word, "partnership, not payback." "I'll see you tomorrow," I said simply, accepting the invitation. I would attend not as a daughter, but as the woman holding all the power. I had one final reflective thought as I prepared for the silent vigil of the night. I pulled out the old termination letter and glanced at my watch. The final stock exchange closing bell was minutes away. The value of Synergy X was soaring. The value of Hart & Company was quietly dropping. The scale had truly tipped. I looked at my reflection, the woman who controlled $25 billion. I whispered to the glass, "The show starts now." The retribution was no longer mine. It was the market's, and I was merely the messenger. The atmosphere inside the Hamptons mansion on Christmas Day was visually flawless, but emotionally fractured. My mother, Eleanor, had outdone herself with the decorations, garlands draped across every surface, scented candles burning, and the dining room table set with the precise legacy silverware. But the perfection was brittle. Richard Hart and Marcus were standing near the fireplace, attempting to project confidence, but their eyes constantly darted towards me, assessing the scale of the financial power I now wielded. I arrived precisely on time, dressed not in the demure style of the old Melissa, but in quiet, powerful elegance, a statement of a woman controlling $25 billion. The greetings were strained. Other relatives offered awkward congratulations, referencing my startup success vaguely as some big tech thing. They were nervous about confirming the embarrassment they saw reflected in my father's tired eyes. The dominant feature in the room was the new television. The massive high-definition screen I had been given was placed against the far wall dominating the space where a painting of some deceased Hart ancestor usually hung. It was silently tuned to the Bloomberg news channel. Richard Hart attempted to ignore it, guiding everyone to the table and initiating conversation about the mild winter and the stability of traditional Wall Street. I sat across from Marcus, maintaining a serene, detached composure. I was an observer waiting for the precisely timed event. "Melissa," Marcus finally broke the forced conversation, his voice strained but attempting its usual false confidence. "Congratulations on the initial public offering visibility. Look, I'm being practical. You've got a massive valuation now, but these tech companies are often just fluff. You should sell a big block of your stock before the bubble bursts. Take the money and run." "Thank you for the advice, Marcus," I replied, cutting a piece of my turkey with slow, deliberate precision. "But our current market metrics show no indication of a burst. We're leveraging the low volatility of our underlying automated intelligence algorithm." He scoffed. "Low volatility. That's what you new market amateurs always say. You don't understand the market cycles. You don't understand real tangible money." I merely set down my fork, meeting his gaze with unblinking stillness. The silence stretched thick and heavy. He flinched first, realizing the unsaid truth I was holding over him. Richard Hart pounded his fist softly on the table. "Melissa, that's enough. This is Christmas, not a conflict," he boomed, though his voice lacked conviction. Before I could reply, the room's tense silence was abruptly shattered by a jarring synthesized chime from the new television. "Breaking news." The familiar authoritative voice of the Bloomberg news anchor, Mark Stevens, cut through the ambient classical music. The entire family tableau froze, their eyes drawn unwillingly to the screen. Richard Hart glared at the TV, furious at the interruption. The headline graphic flashed across the bottom of the screen: Synergy X acquisition rumors. Mark Stevens. The anchor continued, his voice crisp. "The unprecedented success of the Synergy X initial public offering, now valued at $25 billion, is not the only story. Sources familiar with the transaction indicate that the firm, led by its groundbreaking Chief Executive Officer Melissa Hart, is utilizing its massive cash reserves for a targeted strategic acquisition of distressed legacy financial assets." Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Marcus stood halfway out of his chair, staring in horror. Then came the precise, brutal detail. "Our sources confirm the immediate target is a substantial, highly leveraged block of Hart & Company global investment stock, effectively making Synergy X the single largest shareholder in the troubled investment firm. This move is widely viewed as a decisive tech takeover of a fading Wall Street legacy." A sharp, audible crack cut through the stillness as Eleanor dropped her crystal wine glass. The wine spread across the white linen tablecloth like spilled blood, mirroring the downfall of their house. Richard Hart slowly rose from his chair. His face was a mask of utter disbelief, the color draining entirely from his cheeks. He pointed a trembling finger at the television, then swung it toward me. You did this. You planned this retribution. You used that money to destroy your own family's legacy." His voice shook, echoing the deepest betrayal. I remained seated, completely calm, meeting his terrified gaze. I did not raise my voice. "No, Dad." I said, my voice steady, delivering the final line of my narrative. "You told me I'd never make money. I just proved you wrong." The sudden chaotic silence in the dining room was broken only by the dripping sound of wine hitting the rug, evidence of my mother's shattered crystal glass. Richard Hart stood, his face a landscape of disbelief and rage, convinced he was witnessing an organized, malicious act of retribution. "I don't know what you are," he spat, his voice trembling as he pointed towards the Bloomberg screen, which now showed Synergy X stock surging. "But you will not destroy 30 years of the Hart legacy. Stop the acquisition now, Melissa. I'm your father." I pushed my chair back slowly and deliberately and walked toward the library, the room where I had found my termination letter. He followed me, leaving the rest of the family frozen at the dinner table. This was the final, inevitable confrontation. "You talk about legacy, Dad. I began turning to face him under the dim, expensive lighting. You destroyed my legacy 5 years ago on Christmas Day. You didn't just fire me, you slighted me to prevent any Wall Street venture capital firm from giving me money. I detailed every act of manipulation, the damaging claims to Atlantic Ventures to derail my Series A, the public humiliation at the dinner table, and the quiet betrayal that fueled my departure. You didn't want a successor, Dad. You wanted a reflection of Marcus. You wanted control. And you convinced yourself that your own daughter would never make money because your outdated rules said she couldn't. The door creaked open. Marcus stood there no longer arrogant but pale and defeated. He saw the endgame. Melissa. Marcus muttered, his eyes on the floor. I know I was wrong. I was afraid you would expose my own insecurity about the job. I made that stock trade mistake because I was trying to prove I was worthy of the legacy. He looked up, his eyes glassy. Please don't financially ruin him. Just take the board seats. He can't handle losing everything. I looked at my brother, seeing not the bully, but the hollow man the legacy had created. I felt a small, detached flicker of empathy, but no mercy for the company itself. I won't stop the acquisition, Marcus, I stated. But it's not about financial ruin. It's about transformation. I am taking over Hart & Company, not to liquidate it, but to merge its stable assets with Synergy X's automated intelligence and tech platform. I laid out the vision. We are creating a new entity, Synergy Hart, that will be the future of finance. It's not the end of the legacy. It's the start of one based on competence and innovation, not favoritism and manipulation. Richard Hart sank onto the leather sofa, defeated. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a devastating, visible humility. He was witnessing the obsolescence of his entire career. He looked at me, his eyes full of devastating realization. You're right, he finally whispered, his voice trembling with the devastating realization. I was wrong, Melissa. You are the only one of us who truly knows how to make money. You are the chief executive officer I always should have been proud of. His admission, the definitive acknowledgement of my worth, and his failure, was the only retribution I truly needed. I stood over him. I'm offering you and Mother a very comfortable retirement, Dad. You can remain the emeritus founder, attend galas, and talk about the historic merger. But your power is gone. And Marcus? I looked at my brother. You will have to find your own path. There is no place for you in the new firm until you earn your own worth. Marcus nodded, accepting the sentence. It was harsh, but fair. It was justice. I turned back to the mahogany desk, pulling out a tablet. Alex had already forwarded the final takeover documents. I placed the pen on the contract. The acquisition is complete, Dad, I announced, and the final valuation of the combined entity Synergy Hart is now set at $30 billion. I executed the digital signature. I looked at the Christmas tree lights sparkling ironically next to the takeover documents. The old wound was closed. I had redeemed my worth and established the true unstoppable legacy. The acquisition was swift, surgical, and complete. Hart & Company Global Investments was officially absorbed, its outdated structures dismantled and its assets integrated into the gleaming future-forward framework of Synergy Hart. Standing on the 42nd floor of our new Manhattan headquarters, a tower that once housed a fierce rival, I felt the quietude that comes after a major conflict is won. The victory wasn't the final valuation of $30 billion. The true victory was the freedom. The shackles of expectation, the chain of the toxic family legacy, had finally been broken. I spent the weeks following the acquisition focused on establishing the new legacy. The integration was complex, merging the old Wall Street stability with our disruptive tech. We prioritized ethics and innovation, building a system where money flowed transparently, a direct rejection of the dark manipulation my father had employed. My reflections centered constantly on the moment Richard Hart had told me I'd never make money. I realized his curse wasn't born of malice alone, but of fear of change, fear of losing control. His entire world was built on a finite resource, the insider's game. My success proved the resource was infinite innovation and integrity. The true valuation of a person, I concluded, is not their stock price, but their conviction. The new structure left me with the painful but necessary task of dealing with the former owners. Richard Hart and Eleanor relocated permanently to the Hamptons mansion. My mother, no longer preoccupied with the Hart and Company social calendar, seemed softer, lighter. When I visited, the conversation revolved around her new gardening hobby, not appearances or quarterly reports. A week after the final merger, I received a small, heavy envelope in the mail. It contained a handwritten note from Richard Hart, now retired, the first thing he'd written that wasn't a stiff memo since I left for Singapore. Melissa, the market spoke, and you executed perfectly. I won't pretend I'm happy to lose the company, but I see now what legacy truly means. You are the builder I never was. The financial world is better with your worth in it. Please accept my apologies for the past and my total acknowledgement of your power now. You are the true Chief Executive Officer, Richard Hart. I traced the cursive signature with my finger, feeling an overwhelming wave of emotional closure, not triumph, but an unexpected deep peace. For years I'd measured my worth against his disapproval. Now that disapproval had been replaced by a painful, honest acknowledgement. It wasn't the billions that healed the wound, but these few written words that finally severed the last cord of the toxic legacy. The fury was gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of having forced the anchor of the old guard to face the inevitable truth. The most gratifying change, however, was Marcus. Stripped of his title and his father's favoritism, he was forced to confront his own worth. He used the last of his personal savings to found a small local logistics company, a true startup with no Hart name attached. When he called me one afternoon, his voice was different. "Melissa," he said, sounding tired but honest. "It's hard, but I get it now. The money I make now is mine. It's earned. I'm building something real, not just signing Dad's checks. I finally understand what resilience means." "I'm proud of you, Marcus," I told him, meaning it. He didn't need to be saved. He just needed to be forced into honesty. The toxic family dynamic had finally been broken, replaced by mutual respect. My own journey continued. I spent the next year leading Synergy Hart's global expansion, ensuring the firm remained focused on its core values of transparency and democracy in finance. The initial public offering wasn't the goal. It was the mechanism for justice. I was in my office one afternoon when Alex walked in, handing me a small, unassuming newspaper clipping. It was a local article about Marcus's logistics startup, praising his hard work and local hiring initiatives. The title didn't mention Hart and Company. "Look at that," Alex murmured. "He's making his own way." "He is," I agreed. I had achieved the perfect payback, not by destroying my brother, but by forcing him to thrive outside the shadow of his legacy. The quiet truth I had discovered over those years in silence was this: the greatest satisfaction is achieving a peace so absolute that the insults of the past hold no weight. I no longer needed their approval. My worth was quantified not by evaluation, but by my freedom to choose. I had stopped trying to prove them wrong and simply started living my truth. And that, my friends, is the story of how a small, fierce act of self-belief shattered the walls of Wall Street and